All right. So welcome everybody. Hi. Thanks for joining this session. What's going to happen is I'm going to talk you through a project, one of my favorite projects that we've been dealing with during the last roughly 10 months at Cardano Foundation. Actually, the idea was grew basically already like 2 years ago. But what I try to provide you with is a bit of some insights on the why we're doing this, what we are actually doing, and what we have achieved so far. I mean, we've got an hour time, so that's quite a lot. Gonna show you as much tech stuff as you want. We can drive this in a different direction depending on what you're interested in, because I think the topic is very, very diverse, because there's the code part to it, there's an infrastructure part to it, there's even an open source, who should own this actually and drive this initiative in the future. So yeah, let's see. And in case you have any questions, just ask in between. I think we have enough time to talk about anything that you want to know. I see a few familiar faces already, so some of you already heard about the topic. Some of you I know are pretty hardcore developers, auditors, whatsoever. Is there anyone in here that has never heard about Cardano or Cosmos? Got it. Then I'm gonna stick a bit to the why part and why we're actually doing this, and cover this as well. Few words about me. I'm Sebastian, like you can read on my badge. I'm the VP of Engineering at Cardano Foundation. This basically means it's in the name. I run the engineering teams. It's not as spectacular as being the VP of Engineering at IOHK, which have an engineering team of 150 people. We are just 30. But it's still quite impressive in terms of what kind of projects we are doing. I can elaborate about this also a bit, and if you have any questions for any of the engineering projects running at Cardano Foundation, just shoot. I showed this silly picture yesterday when I was presenting the same topic in just a 15-minute talk at Cosmoverse, which is happening in parallel to our event here. The cool thing about the project is basically we get in touch with other ecosystems, and so far the experience when engaging with the Cosmos ecosystem was pretty positive. So all the projects are very welcoming. They are all interested in bridging over to Cardano. I mean, of course, there's a simple and profane need behind it. They want to widen their market. So we've been talking, for example, to Osmosis, which is the biggest DEX running over at Cosmos. And of course, they're interested in also exchanging tokens with basically our native asset ecosystem. But nevertheless, also when engaging with other projects like Axelar, the Interchain Foundation, they are all interested in getting those ecosystems together. And this is interesting because we're not the only ones looking into interoperability, scalability, but with a focus on interoperability in our space. I listed some of the projects in here that have dealt with this in the past or are currently building solutions in that space, just to give some kudos to those projects. Because also many of those projects are not in the great situation that they just get a fixed budget and can execute on it. Some of them just have to rely on catalyst funding, and we all know that it's far less easy to secure that funding and then also run through the processes. So yeah, I'm basically in a great situation when it comes to this. There are super interesting projects going on. Some are pretty obvious if you look at what IOHK has done during the last 1 year, 1.5 years, adopting the substrate stack, building Midnight on top of it, also building the partner chains framework on top of it. So there is also an initiative from TX Pipe, which is called Griffin, where they basically want to bring UTXO support to substrate, which is interesting. Yeah, there's partner chains. We could, by the way, also discuss about the differences between partner chains, para chains, what IBC is. I will also provide a few details on why we chose actually IBC as a standard and what the value proposition is that we see there, why Cosmos SDK is interesting for us. There have been bridges in the past, not just in the past, they're still operated, Rosen Bridge, bridging between Cardano, Ergo, Ethereum, recently announced. There's OneChain, which are very specialized on the non-EVM chain sector. And of course, they are well knowledgeable in the Cardano space as well. I mean, I think we have to face a bit that there are not so many bridges in Cardano because our DeFi ecosystem hasn't been that rich and promising for many. So there were just, when the DeFi craziness was happening, there wasn't so much around in the Cardano space. This is why we don't have tons of bridges that bridge to the other ecosystems already. But still, there are some providers in there. There's also Milkomeda in here. And when we're talking about enterprise adoption, that's actually an interesting thing because many enterprises are very used to the EVM and the tooling around it. And like 2 years, 3 years ago even, we already had this built by DC Spark. It hasn't taken off as it could have been maybe. Not sure what exactly the reasons are. Maybe it's a bit lack of modularity and things like that. But there were pioneers basically in the space that were taking care of it. There are now newer initiatives, just listed one from Flute Tokens, Anastasia Labs here. It's not an interoperability solution at first hand, but it's more about scalability, optimistic rollup called Midgard. Super interesting project because that's also something I'm gonna say is we're building a sidechain SDK with this initiative we're doing, but we're using the Cosmos SDK for you to create your application-specific sidechains. But actually, as being from Cardano, what I would also hope for is getting this Cardano SDK, right? So that I can bring up a sidechain which is UTXO or EUTXO and leverages the technology that the ecosystem basically have built. But nevertheless, I'm also an engineer, so I basically just look around what are the best tools available to build the solutions that the people might need to bring adoption to our space. There's Hydra. We all know Hydra. It's also great, maybe lacking a bit on the developer experience, but also the team has made some good progress there. And we saw the cool use case with Doom running on Hydra. There's Vista Foundation, pretty interesting actually. When we started the project, I heard about Vista and talked to Lloyd Duhan, to Adam and Paul Spater from Vista Foundation, and they basically wanted to do the same or a similar thing, maybe with from a different angle approaching it. But there are a lot of synergies in there, and it's actually interesting for us to work with those ecosystem projects and at some point maybe step back as the foundation doing this project and let one of the community groups, because it's not just one community member or one community team, it's also a foundation. Let them take over, and then we are just happy to be a contributor to all of it. There are also some things to come in the future. One is Paras. Also some details I'm going to provide a bit later in the talk. It's Cardano is not that easy when it comes to bridging over to other ecosystems because we are a Nakamoto-style consensus-based chain, so longest chain basically. We definitely don't have fast settlements. I mean, we have definite settlements, but it's happening after 36 hours. That's not so attractive if you're building a bridge and then someone wants to send a token from Cardano to another bridge and they have to wait basically for 36 hours until they have get the 100% confirmation of it. But of course, reality is settlements typically don't take longer than a couple of minutes. Most occasions maybe way beyond way below 1 minute. This is related to slot battles, height battles, and stuff like that, right? But so it's not that easy. We also don't have proofs, which you typically have with BFD-based protocols like Cosmos, where you just get a nice Merkleized proof that's easy to verify in a smart contract. We don't have this on Cardano. We're going to talk about this when we're looking into the light client design later on. There's also one thing, and I couldn't find a logo, official logo for it. It's a thing called Minotaur. And that's also an interesting thing because when you look at sidechains, application-specific blockchains, basically what you have is someone has a very specific use case, wants a very specific business logic implemented, has some very specific requirements in terms of throughput, maybe privacy, GDPR things, stuff like that. And you cannot do this on the Cardano mainnet because there are some limitations to it, which are good to have, by the way, but just for some enterprise use cases, it's not feasible to go on the mainnet. And then you still, maybe when you're working with different companies which you not necessarily trust, you probably want to go the way of a smaller application-specific sidechain. But the problem is, if you run this sidechain, then it's mostly, and especially in the beginning, only operated by very few operators. And also there's not much economical power in this, especially when it's a POS chain, in this ecosystem, which makes it super vulnerable to attacks, right? So Minotaur, things like you have it with a Parachain SDK on Polkadot. You have even an IBC standard called ICS 28, which is really about let those smaller blockchain networks inherit some or all of the security of a bigger blockchain network. And in that case, it would be basically that those small application-specific sidechains would inherit the same level of security, or a part of it, from the Cardano mainnet, which is a huge value proposition. If you look at Cardano and how our validator network is built up, I think it's one of the major selling points, right? Because we have not just a few validators, like 200 or something like you have it in the Cosmos space. Not every one of them is KYC'd, so it makes certain things then on the business side a bit more difficult. But still, it's super robust, right? And if you look at the SPOs, typically when I pitch Cardano to businesses, I pitch the SPOs as being those old school badass administrators that are responsible for running our infrastructure. And this really clicks with the Web2 industry and the legacy industry because they feel safe. And this is, on the one hand, a huge value proposition. And then if you look at that, we've got more than 1,000 active stake pools. This is also something where we can make much more out of this infrastructure and out of those peoples involved than we currently do it. Because right now, those people are just responsible for securing the mainnet. But if you look in the Ethereum space, what's happening there in terms of AVSs, restaking, there are also viable businesses that those stake pool operators, if there is the right incentive in place, can also secure other services. Like, for example, smaller blockchain networks, or like a bridge, or even like a non-blockchain service. And this is an interesting, if you look in the future, this is a really interesting new business model and something we should definitely explore. And if you see what kind of craziness and investments are happening around EigenLayer and co. In Ethereum, this is a whole new branch for our network validators, how to earn money. And then if you look at how currently Cardano, the incentives for the stake pool operators basically paid out to a large extent by the reserves, and at some point the reserves will just be empty. This is something we definitely have to look into, at least on a horizon of 4 to 5 years or something like that. Yeah, it's good that we have an hour. It's just one slide that I showed, and it's already 15 minutes gone. That's the agenda slide. I'm going to jump over it. Let's talk a bit about the what and the why. The DeFi story is simple. Is told in a simple way. I mean, Cardano has roughly 200, 250 million, depends on the ADA cores. Sometimes it's just 180 million in TVL in the DeFi space. That's okay. It's not great, so could be better. And in terms of making our DeFi ecosystem more, just make it bigger, allow our protocols, like the DEXs and the lending protocols and whatsoever, get access also to other markets. You see how important it is to have bridges in place. Or interop protocols. Does not necessarily always have to be a bridge, right? And if you then look at IBC, it's basically in terms of just DeFi and volume exchange, it's most of the time it's the third greatest interop protocol when it comes to this aspect. We also have one chain. It's much smaller, but still it's there, and it's also allowing Cardano users today to exchange some critical assets, right? But Cardano Foundation is not really about DeFi. It's not one of our main target audiences. And I asked my marketing and PR team if I'm allowed to share this slide, and I'm thankfully allowed to. That's the tactical implementation plan, actually for this year from Cardano Foundation. And what I want to highlight there are on the right-hand side, you can see this very well, the target audiences that we are trying to focus on. And it's regulators and policymakers. That's mostly the job of our legal team. So we are trying to educate, or from Fred, we're trying to work with those people, educate them, talk about, okay, what are the specifics of Cardano's staking system? How is it different from Ethereum's? What are the legal implications to it? And it's pretty interesting. And there were also some significant wins, maybe a bit limited to the Swiss market, but when it comes to regulating stake pool operators, it really helps just explaining how Cardano is working and what the key facts of our liquid staking model are. We've got end users and enterprises. This is basically the target audience for IBC. We've got the developers. I mean, there are a lot of developer ecosystem related activities of us. We're not doing them on our own. Mostly we're doing them together with the community in an open source way. And of course, we have the stake pool operators, just because stake pool operators are key. Without them, there's no mainnet, right? I'm gonna spare the left part. I mean, it's basically just a typical consultant slide. Maybe you see that Fred is coming from PwC on that slide, but it simplifies what we have. We have the network stack. We have the layer 1 protocol, so ledger rules, maybe even our smart contract ecosystem. Then on top, you have something which we call the value creation layer. If you're a techie, you would probably just call it an API layer. So all the means that allow you to interact with the network. And then on top, you have the business. So people building applications on top of Cardano, which is the value capture layer, where the money is made, hopefully. Yeah, that's the highlight that IBC is all about, end users and enterprises. And the story behind all this is basically based on different experiences that we made 2 years ago, roughly, when we were pitching Cardano and designing solutions together with legacy companies in the supply chain space. Actually, it was a Spanish ham manufacturer. Sounds pretty funny, but it's a huge industry on the one hand, and also it's all about circular economy, track and trace. You want to know where the meat is coming from that in the end ends up in the supermarket. It's also about tracking their emissions, carbon emissions, energy, any waste, and then also there's a healthcare sector to it, because sometimes just the meat and the ham gets polluted by by something, and then you have to track back basically from which batch of animals this disease is coming, and all those kinds of things are where even the European Union is interested in, and not enforcing but encouraging to use blockchain technology for it. We looked into this use case. We figured out, okay, it's actually great for Cardano, but they had some requirements in terms of throughput. The number of events that they wanted to record on the blockchain were just too much for the mainnet. And then engineers know it. What we typically do is we start drafting architectures which are more or less just a trade-off. And you start keeping things off-chain, not putting it on-chain, maybe generating something like a Merkle proof of your event list and only submitting the Merkle tree root with a signature on the mainnet. And by that, of course, allowing something like that you can check if something recorded by this track and trace solution has really been recorded and not tampered with. But it's also a damn hard pitch to tell someone that's totally into hemp manufacturing, who wants to use the blockchain, after you have explained the blockchain to them, now you start explaining them, yeah, but I'm actually not putting your data on blockchain. I'm keeping it off chain. I'm just putting this weird thing that's called a proof on chain, and it doesn't make so much sense for them. We were, of course, looking around if we are able to figure out that there is another engineering solution available. There was IOHK Sidechain SDK around this time, but it wasn't really in a shape where you could easily deploy it. There was a lot of research that was going into it, but also IOHK decided to kind of discontinue those activities and channel this team more in the partner chains framework. But partner chains, again, were far out, right? And if you see that we just had the release of the alpha version of it, it wasn't really just a tool that we could use. With IBC, the framework, we would basically get just a messaging protocol, which would allow us to deploy those sidechains I've been talking about, and then have a specific mean how those sidechains can exchange messages in a secure way with a mainnet, right? This opens up a lot of possibilities, and mostly for me as an engineer or architect, whatever you want to call me, mainly administrator actually of my tech teams, is flexibility, right? Because it opens up a whole new solution space when I want to design solutions on top of Cardano, and by that make it more inclusive for more use cases, which is what we basically want, because we need those use cases happening on Cardano, not just trading assets and whatever. It's also important, but we need this diversity in the use cases that are deployed to Cardano to make it more robust and resilient in the future, right? I'm gonna skip this one because it's a nice theoretic primer on what blockchain interop actually means. There are different types of interop on protocol level, data, smart contract, asset interoperability. If you look at, for example, USDC and how it's implemented across chains with their CC cross-chain transfer protocol, token transfer protocol, something like that. This is a certain type of interoperability that you can get. Very centralized maybe, works in a very good way for Circle. But just to show you that there are different types of interoperability. There are also different types of how you could implement a bridge or an interoperability solution between different blockchain networks. Some of them are more decentralized, some of them are less. Some of them are permissionless in terms of, like IBC is, for example, with their relayer infrastructure that allow just arbitrary people to participate in the message relaying between two blockchain networks. Lots of different things. There's also, I don't know if, OneChain is very active in this. There's a lot of standardization activities happening even in the IETF, which is one of the internet standardization committees or groups. But they all focus very much, after some bold beginnings, now they all focus very much on token asset transfer or safe asset transfer. That's actually the name of the standard that they have created and published. But it does not cover the whole space, basically, of cross-chain messaging. And IBC, just for the understanding, is a means how to implement all of those different schemes. So you can take one of those schemes and implement it via IBC. If you look at Polkadot parachains, of course, they have their own cross-chain messaging format. It's called XCM. Cross-chain messaging, there we go. Avalanche subnets has a different approach to it. And then you have Cosmos zones, which basically communicate as the canonical way via IBC. Inter-blockchain communication protocol is pretty simple, straightforward from its principles. It's just a means to exchange messages between two different blockchain networks in a secure way. And it has a super simple, straightforward security model, which is based on, in simple words, trusting the consensus of the other blockchain. So what you basically do, you implement something that's called a light client. And a light client is kind of something that runs on, let's say, Cosmos, and is able to verify a proof that was generated on the Cardano side, so that the Cosmos chain or the Tendermint SDK-based chain can check if a message is relayed over there, like, for example, an asset has been locked in my smart contract, it can verify, okay, this is really what happened on the other chain, without the need of those Cosmos SDK-based chain network operators to run their own Cardano node. It's the same the other way around. If we want to implement this on the Cardano side, what we have to implement is a light client for the Tenement consensus, which is the main consensus algorithm used in the Cosmos space, on Cardano. And then what's happening is basically there's something called a relayer sitting in between both chains, observing both chains and then delivering those proofs to those light clients. And then the light clients take those proofs and verify them. And if they are sound and valid, then they allow basically downstream operations to happen. That's the whole security model of, no, it's not the whole security model. It's the major part of their security model. There's also something, and you see it in the layers there, that you've got a separation of functional units. So if there is one mistake or one error, bug whatsoever in one of the functional units, it does not propagate through the whole system and is hopefully caught then on the next layer. It's pretty close actually to what you have with the OSI models. It's a similar approach, and it's also where a lot of the inspiration from IBC initially came from. It's designed basically like TCP/IP was. Our primary scope is basically building this Tau layer, just because we need it as a tool and want to provide it as a tool for the builders in the Cardano space and for enterprises that want to build on it. Secondary scope is then this application layer, and we just needed to demonstrate basically that the application is working on top of what we have built. So if I show you some of the example applications, we by no means as Cardano Foundation want to go into the business of implementing a DEX or a swap application. It's just to demonstrate it. That's a bit more detailed. Let me check the time. That's a bit more details on what the different primitives and terms are in IBC. So like I already said, we've got those light clients, which you can see over there. You've got the Tau layer, which is this transport, authentication, and ordering layer. So basically all those messages that you receive then on Cardano or on Cosmos are basically transmitted in a way that you can trust them, right? In a trustless way. Or you can prove that you can trust them by your own. That's maybe the right way to express it. There's an app layer that's pretty interesting if you look at the standard, the IBC standard. There's a GitHub repository about, and they standardize the lower layers, the Tau layer of it, but they also define certain applications that can be built on top of it. Like, for example, a token transfer, that's ICS20, or interchain accounts, so that you can have an account that is not just living on one blockchain, but is living on multiple blockchains. And we're not so much looking into this one because we are more interested in the lower layers here. Everything else is more just for having a reference implementation. And you see this when you're looking at the repositories that I'm going to share a bit later, that the focus is really on the lower layers. Yeah, that's the interchain. They have a nice explorer, which is called a map of zones, where you can see all the different protocols, the traffic between those chains. It's nice. Just check it out. What we have done since, the project was so far structured in 3 phases. The first phase was really just about feasibility. We were testing if we are at all able, with the Aiken smart contract programming language and the off-chain facilities that we have, to implement a Tenement light client on Cardano. We basically didn't give so much about mainnet deployability in that phase. So the execution budgets basically were horrible, and you could never have run this on one of the public networks. But we just wanted to know if it's possible at all. What we also did is, in the first phase, a very simplistic light client that was more or less just submitting block headers over to Tenement. And then Tenement was basically checking if the signatures in there are sound and if the signatures are coming from one of the validly registered stake pool operators. But it would have basically allowed everyone to sheet the light client, every stake pool operator, by the way. So not really secure. But you could have already used this light client in a notary scheme, for example. So you could have had a trusted entity in place or multiple trusted entity in place that then sign off on those block headers initially. And then you could have said, okay, it's signed off by Cardano Foundation, IOHK, by, I don't know, Gimbal Labs, or by whomsoever, and I trust them. And that's why I am okay with this type of light client. But of course, it's not really a perfect solution. We have public testnet environments deployed. You can see it here. Of a token swap application on the one hand. You just can scan those QR codes or go to these URLs. It's quite clunky, but it's working. On the Cardano side, it's deployed to the preview network at the moment. On the Cosmos side, it's deployed. We have deployed a local fork of the Osmosis network. They also have public testnet environments, but just to keep dependencies low at the current stage, we made it locally work. There are some, so what you basically can do is, let me see if I can show it. That's the live demo part, which is typically the part that does not work out, but just to show you that things are there. That's a small Explorer application because, yeah, I can talk here for 2 hours. And probably there will still be question marks in some of your heads because no one really gets a grasp on it. It's a very infrastructure topic, right? But just to get a visualization what's actually happening, we created this small viewer application which observes what's happening on the Cardano side, on the Relay side, and also on the Cosmos side. And then, for example, you can look into one of those transactions, click it, and you see in a very descriptive way, at least I think it's kind of descriptive, hey, we sent something from one chain to the other chain. It was picked up by a relayer. In our case, pretty uninteresting because we just have one relayer. Typically in the Cosmos space, you don't just have one relayer, but multiple relayers, of course. That's where the security and decentralization is coming from in that case. And then you can see basically what was happening when you submitted the transaction. Just for showing how things are working. It's public, please try it out. You can basically just connect your wallets to it. In my case, I just used Eternal, a preview wallet on it. Cosmos wallet, I was using this one. It's called Cosmos Station. Do I have Wi-Fi? Okay. I mean, we can try it out, but no guarantees that it's going to work. So basically what I would do is I select Cardano, then target chain is just an arbitrary sidechain. I say save and close. This design, by the way, is copied from TFM Crypto. We talked to the team, asked them if it's okay, but we didn't want to come up with an own token swap application design. It's just not in the focus of the application. You can see I've got a lot of test ADA actually, but the coin in that case is called Lovelace, of course. Gonna specify that I want to send this amount over there. Then I go to my Eternal wallet, copy the receive address, paste it in here. Have to wait because it's checking basically what the transaction fees would be. I'm really not sure if this is going through because of internet connection or something.
Shouldn't it be the sidechain address and not Cardano?
That's right. Jesus Christ. So right. Thanks for helping me out. Okay, so now I've got my sidechain, Cardano. I select the token. It's called stake. No, it's called token. Let's select the token. Pretty descriptive. We send 100 tokens. There we go. Now it's working. And then we hit transfer. Fingers crossed. I have to sign the transaction, of course. Hate live demos, by the way. Typically, my boss was doing this and in the past, and I was the engineer sitting there. Might work, maybe not. But it worked. Now we can look to do the full circle. Go to this Explorer and check. There's a recent transaction. It's still processing. We can look here. It's amount of 100 tokens. And it's still in the processing stage. So we have to wait a bit because that's what I said. It's pretty similar to TCP/IP. What's basically happening is there is now a message sent over to the Cosmos chain, and then the Cardano side is waiting for an acknowledgement that this message has been received and has been processed by the application that was listening for this, for this thing. Let's move back, see if we received the confirmation yet. Might take a while. Yes, just ask.
Do you have an invitation in terms of which token you can exchange, or basically any native assets?
Any native assets would work basically. But you need something like a token registry, which we have, and then you need like a representation of the Cardano token in a wrapped way then on the Osmosis side, for example.
This only works as far as the tokens are quote unquote dumb, right? You cannot have some deeper logic. Let's say if you have something smart on the...
Yeah, it's by no means an ERC20 converter or something in between. Right.
I'm just curious, are the relayers, are they just transfer data? They don't do any validation, right?
No, they're dumb.
They're dumb. The question is then, can Nostr relayers be used for this information, for this purpose? Because Nostr has a reasonably large network of relayers.
Yeah, I can't tell, but we basically just we're building on top of the Go SDK and of the canonical implementation of Cosmos relayers, and just added a few facilities because I mean we don't share the same APIs as Cosmos nodes typically do. So yeah, but yeah, if they are, and this is one of the next steps that we have to do, talk to infrastructure providers if they want to run those kinds of relayers once the solution is mature enough for it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Welcome.
So the IBC and let's say the light client plus relayer, does the protocol itself ensures locking of the tokens on one side, or is that something that has to be built independently?
The relayer doesn't care. They just pick up basically a message and transmit it over. They don't care about the application. And yes, we have to pick it up in the right way on the Cardano side. Let's put it that way, which is also, and it's on my last slide basically, where one of the necessary steps is also when it comes to wallets, how they integrate with it, and then also for DEXs, how they integrate with it. This needs to be standardized from my point of view.
Yeah, it probably should be a set of CIPs.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the dumbest possible, the least secure way, but, you know, a businessman inside me thinks, just send to this address, I'll relay the message and we'll unlock it on the others, or unlock it, create it on the other side. No smart contracts needed, but not so secure because I can just reuse the tokens on this side. If we are talking like a bridge, right? If then the smarter thing would be, okay, implement a smart contract, then the smarter would be decentralize the relayers, network, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I mean by we're looking in the tau layer, the lower layers, and then how you implement the token swap application on top of it. It's up to someone else who has really an incentive in it, and they can implement whatever fancy logic that they want, basically. For this setup, I just put it up here so you understand for the token swap application, or if you look into, there are already like roughly 180 Cosmos SDK based chains out there. We need something in between, just because, I mean, I can try, but typically what you need is on the Cosmos SDK chain, that's the one in the middle here, besides the standard Tenement Lite client that is able to speak to other Tenement blockchains, Cosmos blockchains, you now need to install a Cardano Lite client, right? And I mean, we can try and ask every of those 175 projects out there and ask them if they want to activate the Cardano Lite client, but it's unlikely that they're doing it because maybe the incentive is not good enough. But what we can do is we can have a bridge in between, Cosmos blockchain in between, operated maybe by, I don't know, Vista Foundation or by OneChain or by whomsoever, who has an incentive in it, maybe even Cardano Foundation if no one has an incentive in it. And then this kind of translated. So it gets rid of all the Cardano specifics. And they even have standard modules for message forwarding in IBC. And then basically from this bridge, I call it the bridge, it's basically also a Cosmos SDK-based chain. You can communicate in the canonical way with all the existing Cosmos SDK-based chains out there. But of course, someone needs to operate this piece in the middle, and it's typically not done by relayers, relayer operators. This needs to be done by someone else. Yeah. By the way, we also implemented for subquery, which is one of the cross-chain indexers. We implemented a Cardano implementation to a limited degree, just to support this Explorer application. But it's also like a nice side effect. I also prepared, because I wanted to get my hands dirty in trying out, okay, what does it actually mean if I'm now an enterprise and want to build a Cosmos SDK-based sidechain and then connect it to Cardano. It's on GitHub. I implemented a Cosmos SDK-based chain using standard tools. There's one tool for scaffolding in the Cosmos space called Ignite. Makes it super simple to bring up a chain, define some messages that the chain is able to process, and then also activate the IBC functions in this network. What I also did is then I took our light client and copied it in and made some configuration amendments. You can see it in the GitHub repository. Pretty straightforward, actually. So to make it Cardano enabled. And by that, yeah, we allowed running our own relayer, which has those Cardano specific modifications in there so that we can fetch data and build transactions in a way which typically the Go relayer doesn't support, send them over to Cardano. What this use case does is, that's where you see the ship, and I thought we are in Dubai, maybe nice logistics use case is interesting for everyone. We fetch data from an API. In that case, that API is called Data Elastic. What they're doing is they're tracking ships. And I was looking actually at the Oracle space in Cardano, where we have a few oracles, but maybe not enough. And what we're doing is we're fetching the data from there. We're generating an outlier. It's kind of a simulated environment. Then we are detecting that outlier, consolidating the data report, and submitting it via IBC over to Cardano, where then maybe some smart contract can pick it up there. That's the use case. I'm working with Anastasia Labs at the moment on getting this thing running again, because the public test environment you saw for the token transfer is running. That use case, I didn't manage to get it run because we patched the node version basically, and there seems to be some incompatibility. Still trying to analyze it, which is, yeah, so I cannot show it live to you. But please check out the repository. Gonna make an announcement once I or we fix this bug. That's a bit hard to admit during a presentation. The how, already told a lot about this. Actually, if you want to implement IBC for any chain out there, one of the crucial things is, of course, get a light client running on your chain, but also implement a light client for your chain on another chain, which has been the biggest challenge so far. I also see people here in the room that have done this, for example, for Ethereum, so that you have an Ethereum light client running on Cosmos. Very interesting challenge, and we put Mithril at use to get this fixed. They're gonna jump over this one and this one. Still gonna work a bit on getting the off-chain stack streamlined, because right now the setup is still on the infrastructure side too fat, if you ask me, because we have DB Sync in the stack, Kupo, Ogmios. We now switched recently to Lucid Evolution, so no longer legacy Lucid. It's still in the progress. To make it, we're using some Go libraries from Blink Labs there, and also other community Go libraries, which is pretty cool for the relayer implementation. I'm happy that we have it. But at least what we can do is get rid of DB Sync, not so much because DB Sync is not a good tool. It's mostly to get the footprint down, right? And make the solution just simpler. or you can scrap the goal Haskell wrapper here. That was just in the very first version, and an interesting engineering take on how to do block header verification in Go by wrapping the Haskell code. But yeah, that's just a colorful anecdote on that one. Garners, yeah, that's the light client thingy. In the first version, I already said it, the light client was pretty weak. And if you look at a Cardano Shelly spec header file, you basically only get one signature in the block headers. And this is what really exists on chain, and that what you can fetch from the chain and deliver to the tenement chain to have it validated by the light client over there. That's not that much, right? Because I mean, every stake pool operator could in that case trick the light client and just say basically, hey, this transaction was included in the last block. Please take it, and the light client would happily accept it and probably trigger any downstream activity that's not really according to what happened actually on Cardano. When you look at Tenement, the cool thing about Tenement is that you get a list of block signatures. That's how, I mean, it's BFT consensus, right? So that's easy to prove on Cardano. Or let's say it's more or less just a simple or profane and more straightforward engineering approach to proving those kinds of things. But also, of course, it comes with a downside, because it limits on Cosmos the number of validator nodes that you can have for your Cosmos chain is much less than you can have it with chains like Cardano or that are built like Cardano. So it's a trade-off, and it's definitely, so solving the Cardano part is not an easy thing, but we were looking around a bit because we are not the only Nakamoto-style consensus chain that is implementing an IBC port, or however you want to call it. So we had a look at how Solana did it. And basically what those guys did is they created an overlay network on top of Solana. And this overlay network is basically also observing the chain and signing off on blocks that they receive. And then they collect those signatures. And when we read this, it really rang a bell, because that's basically what we have with Mithril, right? And I made this joke at the Builder Fest just to check if my audience is still listening. But whatsoever. So Mithril to the rescue. And when I told about this at the Builder Fest, talked about this at the Builder Fest in April, we were just trying out if it's really possible, because there was a new feature introduced to Mithril, which not only gave us signatures from stake pool operators, so on whole chain snapshots, but what we get was transaction inclusion proofs. So was a certain transaction really adopted by the network? And then this is signed off with the Mithril network participants and their stake. So you could basically decide on your own if there was enough stake in this list of signatures so that you want to trust it. So that was pretty cool by the Mithril team. Kind of an incident or accident, because we weren't really asking for it. But we have been heavily relying on this in the past. Yes.
Is this these Mithril signatures proofs verifiable from ZK Snark?
Not yet.
Why?
Oh no. Then my answer is wrong. It's verifiable, or you can create ZK Snark proofs from it. That's also one of the work.
Is it possible to verify a Mithril based inclusion proof using ZK Snarks?
Yes, it is, but it hasn't been built yet. The Mithril team wants to work on this, as far as I know.
Awesome, thank you.
Cool. There was also another signature scheme that they wanted to roll out to get more compact proofs. It's called Alba. That's a bit a different take on how proof can be generated, and I don't have the most recent information if they're still following up on it.
We can do signature aggregation, right?
I think it's possible to do the signature aggregation rather than to have a lot of signatures from stake pool operators, right?
I mean, that's what they're doing, right? The Mithril aggregator is aggregating. It's basically collecting the signatures.
No, it's aggregating into one signature. I mean, so it's going to be one signature.
Yeah, okay. I think this will be then the approach basically. So you mean you create a signature from signatures?
Yes.
Basically,
yes.
yeah. That's possible.
Do you happen to know if there is some work in progress on that?
I don't know where they are. I just heard that they are working on it, but mostly focusing on the ZK snark part.
Okay, thank you.
So Mithril is great. We're just happy that we got this tool, which actually wasn't originally intended to do it. If you look at this approach, it's pretty similar to what you have with AVSs and restaking on Ethereum. Of course, there's no slashing on Cardano, which maybe from a game theory perspective doesn't make it so secure as you have it in the Ethereum space. Maybe not. I think there's still a lot of research that needs to happen in that space. But we've got a profane engineering challenge still, which is the settlement times. And if you look at the Mithril network currently deployed to mainnet, they wait for 120 blocks until they generate those proofs, which I've been talking about. And waiting for 120 blocks multiplied by 20, so it's quite a significant number of minutes that you have to wait until your proof has been built. It's better than 36 hours, but it's not perfect. For lots of the enterprise applications, that's totally fine, right? Because you maybe think about, you collect data on the Cosmos side, and then, for example, for those ships, the data is only updated every 12 hours. And so basically, you don't care about this high-level throughput. But looking from a user experience perspective, from someone wanting to do DeFi, that's not quite a nice experience. And this is a problem because at the moment, Mithril was built in a way that you cannot, as a client, decide how many blocks you want to wait for until your proof gets generated. And the Mithril team also looked into this, and recently I saw that they finished the work on it. They decentralized or worked into the decentralization of this configuration parameter. So in the end, as a bridge operator, I can decide, okay, I don't need to wait for 120 blocks. Maybe I just want to wait for 20 blocks or something like that, and I buffer everything else, or just take the risk that there might be still rollbacks happening, but it's very unlikely, so it's okay for me to accept it, basically. So that's pretty cool, and in that sense, Mithril is almost becoming something like a decentralized prover marketplace. Of course, with very, very limited set of proofs that are allowed, and of course, there's no real marketplace happening, but maybe that's a nice thing for Mithril in the future. So to also have more incentives for Mithril network operators, which we're lacking at the moment, right? Yeah, I'm gonna skip this and this, because I want to talk about this one. And this is really where I think the project was well positioned at Cardano Foundation until the current point in time. And I also am convinced until the end of the year, we are the right place for this to drive. But there are definitely some aspects to it where Cardano Foundation is not the right player to drive this forward. And this is especially when I look at standard for wallet integration. I mean, happy to invite all the wallets in the Cardano space and talk about those things. But there's also Intersect, right? And they have a wallet working group, and we can talk about interfacing with such a system, which cannot, by the way, only be used to bridge over to Cosmos, but also as Solana has an IBC implementation, we can bridge over to Solana, to Ethereum, and all those kinds of things. But I'm convinced we need a standard for it, right? And it's best if the wallet providers talk about it and align on a standard how they want to do it. Same as for DEXs. We have talked a bit with Sunday, with MinSwap, and with MinSwap it's actually pretty cool because the solution has been built by a Vietnamese team, situated based in Hanoi, and yeah, it's easy for MinSwap to talk with those guys. But still, I would foresee we need a standard for it when it comes to this. Also, when you're talking about we have wrapped assets, what's the standard for wrapped assets? So also when you look at OneChain, they have their own proprietary standard or their standard for how they wrap those assets. when they receive it from other networks and when they unwrap it basically. And I think it would be good if we have a standard for it so that it can be handled by anyone. And I really think that's something that the community should drive and not so much Cardano Foundation, because like said, our mission is more or less to drive this lower layer availability of the tooling. Not saying we're bailing out here, but I just think someone else can do it better than we can do it. There are more things. Cross-chain security, we haven't touched on this yet just because we had to take care of all the other things. I'm pretty much convinced that ICS 28 is not the way to go ahead when it comes to having the sidechains inherit the level of security, the security from the Cardano mainnet. Cardano Space is doing great research there with Minotaur. There are other approaches to it. And it's also a big trade-off discussion because I think it's pretty straightforward to inherit the security from the Cardano mainnet, and maybe the partner chains team is looking into this. But it also gets cumbersome at the same time, because it basically means you're asking the stake pool operators if they want to secure your sidechain, and then you easily get into some mechanisms that you have with parachains in the Polkadot ecosystem. And we have seen, or it's one of the points of critics for Polkadot basically, that their approach to it is too greedy. So it's good for Polkadot, but not so good for the sidechains. And it has caused quite some harm in that ecosystem, at least from my outside perspective. We need to talk to infrastructure providers. That's what we already have started. We need a full audit on the framework on the one hand. And if we have this infrastructure provider for this intermediate chain that I showed selected, then I also want, because hopefully there are significant amounts of assets transferred then via this infrastructure, it needs to be secure, right? So that we don't have any mean things happening with the Cardano bridge. Integrate with Cosmos Builder tools. That would be nice, because right now with Ignite, it's easy to deploy the Cosmos part, but then I have to go ahead and copy things around and make some adaptations to the code. If there's just a simple plugin for Ignite or for one of the other builder tools in the Cosmos space, that makes it easy to deploy the solution. And then we have reduced the footprint. So get rid of a few legacy things that are still in there. Maybe get rid of DB-Sync, because we don't need all the data that DB-Sync is providing. Also, there's a nice new Mithril feature, sounding a bit like a Mithril fanboy, but there is one which gives you stake distribution snapshots, which are also secured by the stake of the Mithril network operators. And that's basically what we also need in this implementation on the Lite client. So still quite some work to do. I hope within the next... So what we're currently doing is we're doing a project with Anastasia Labs where they basically give us some scrutiny, someone looking at what we have built on the Cardano side, really limited on the Cardano side, on-chain, off-chain, and looking into, okay, are there any obvious security flaws in there? Are there any efficient or not so obvious things? Or are there any efficiency optimizations that we can do? And there are quite a lot. With all those findings that we get right now, I'm pretty happy I get a lot of findings. We're going to work on them and work them in the solution. So that's going to happen until the end of the year. And then we, for this, talking about timelines is always a bit difficult, but going to make this mistake here. What we have planned is doing the full audit on the solution in Q1 2025. So then hopefully, depending on how the audit goes, end of Q1 2025, we can have this chain in place. If not, rolled out to an extent that it allows indefinite amounts of tokens to be exchanged between Cosmos chains and Cardano, but maybe rate limited or something like that. That's also the approach that, for example, good example from Solana, that they rate limited their bridge that they had put in place, so that they have some time to figure out if there are some more flaws that they might have overseen. That's it. I'm open for more questions. I heard we have the room until open end. Yeah. Any questions?
questions?
Also discussions, because I really missed the point where I explained everyone why we chose Cosmos and not, for example, Substrate. And the main reason was basically we were looking into, I was not so much, so on the one hand, I was looking into who has a mature blockchain SDK. Substrate is pretty mature. Maybe it's even cooler because it's Rust and not Go. And then you had Cosmos. This was the one thing. We were then also looking into what's the messaging standard. We had IBC and XCM on the Substrate side. And then I was also looking into already, because this was actually the thing that was interesting me, those security inheritance mechanisms available. And the cool thing that you get with Cosmos is the sidechains you're building, they are sovereign sidechains. So there is no tight coupling with a mainnet, with some parachain that you would need. And I was in favor, or we were in favor of going down this route because it's more, we consider it more flexible. So then you can choose what kind of security inheritance mechanism you would want to put in place, and also choose how much security you actually need for your project, right? So this is in the reason why we went with Cosmos.
Yeah, just another thing, like if you talk about the Substrate ecosystem, we can also have a standalone chain that's not coupled with the parachain. So what made you, like, given that, what made you decide? I'm genuinely curious. What made you decide that Cardano was still a better option?
Cardano, for Cardano a better, Cosmos is a better option.
Sorry, Cosmos was a better option.
Yeah, I mean, I can bring up a chain with Substrate, and then have it run by itself. But then if I want to put those mechanisms or standards in place, the canonical standards in place, that I get this security inheritance, which at some point I definitely want, I have to also make changes to our core protocol. And I don't need this with Cosmos. So this was also one of the constraints. I didn't want to touch the core protocol. I didn't want to ask someone to add something to our ledger state, add some new logic, something to what the core node needs to do. I just wanted to do it with the facilities that are already in place. That was the approach. And with parachains, we looked at it, or with Substrate, we looked at it, but we would have had to make changes on the core layer, and we didn't want to do it at that time. Right now, if you look at what Partner Chains is doing, and Midnight and stuff like that, and products like that, they're open to changing maybe the core layer. And if you look at Minotaur and the stuff like and approaches like that, it's not necessarily not a must to do, but it would be easier to do it if you change the core layer on it. So it's more involved, basically. Maybe that's the decision.
Yeah, I was going to bring up the partner chains. When we talk about shared security, or inheriting the security of Cardano, I mean, IOG insists that partner chains inherit the security. I disagree with that openly. It's a nice marketing spin, that's fine, but I don't see how a stake snapshot of Cardano gives you more inherent security for a completely independent chain. I think this approach is different, but I think just partner chain method is an extra unnecessary step, which is doing basically same as this.
I fully agree on the current version of partner chains that has been released, saying that with this alpha release, you already get this security from the mainnet for your partner chain, side chain, so to say. That's just not true, because what you do is you ask a stake pool operator. So manually, you approach a stake pool operator and ask them, hey, do you also want to run my node, my sidechain node? And do you want to, by the way, run this infrastructure that I need for, that's basically doing the chain observing. So in the alpha release, that's definitely not true. In the future, I hope, and I think IOHK is doing this, right? That they introduce those things Minotaur. And we have talked to their research team that is behind Minotaur, and they have actually outlined a roadmap for the partner chains team to integrate with it. And I know that, talking with Mike Ward from IOHK, for example, that they're currently revising the roadmap so that it gets real security inheritance. But I agree with what you said. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what can it do to ensure real security is that by indecent, let's call it, behavior on the partner chain, you get not slashed, but let's say you get VRF discriminated against on Cardano.
Mm-hmm.
In that way, you can be punished for bad behavior. Also, it's a step in the right direction. I would argue that not even that is inheritance. But, okay, I guess that's more of a social conversation. But if you said that there is a lot of things that maybe community can do, and Cardano Foundation is doing the main push of creating this. We spoke about CIPs. I mean, always being in this community for a few years, it always ends up, we all kind of know what should be done, but rarely or just a few people actually pick up the shovel.
Yeah.
So I don't know what can we do to, because it's not reasonable to expect few wallets and few enthusiasts to build out, because this requires at least 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 CIPs if we're going to standardize it properly. Or one huge one, but that's just going to open a discussion of 3 years.
Yeah, it's a simple answer. There has to be a commitment from Cardano Foundation to push this further. That's one thing, because I mean we have the staff to basically do it. Of course, there are tons of things that you could do as the blockchain foundation in the Cardano space. Just look at Twitter, what people want that we do, bring USDC, bring L2s, we should do layers and whatsoever. I mean, that's also something that IOHK is doing, but there are so many topics that we can look into. But I'm convinced, Cardano Foundation is the one thing. The other thing is that's where I'm looking in the direction of Vista Foundation. If there is a group, and it's not just a group of one party, but it's a group of multiple players, then I would hope for that this group is strong enough. It's maybe the same approach that we take with Omaru, where we have Pragma. And disclaimer, I'm on the administrative board of Pragma. But we are convinced we cannot do it on our own, but we also don't want to be in this hierarchical situation where we say, okay, this is Cardano's baby and everyone else is more or less supporting. We really want to be on an equal level at the table. And this is where initiatives like Pragma, like Vista, and maybe other initiatives are good. Just looking at the building, by no means saying that it needs to get as sophisticated as Intersect is, and looking into the governance, it's really about building it. But those are, lots of words, but in the end, it's whether Cardano Foundation has to push it, or we have an organization where maybe Cardano Foundation is just part of, plus multiple community groups, and then we have to push it forward. More questions, concerns, criticism? Yes, please.
I have another ZK Snark question. Maybe you know, is it possible to implement light Ouroboros algorithm as a light client? Do proofs of the Ouroboros consensus using ZK Snarks?
That would be just so nice to have.
Yes.
Cardano, so to be honest, Cardano Foundation hasn't been really looking into ZK.
That's the future.
It's nice that you mention it. We haven't been looking into this, right? Because for a long time, we've also learned so much about infrastructure development for Cardano. I mean, we were more on this API layer that I showed. So this was where ZK and the like wasn't very interesting. But if you look at this roadmap or at those additional topics that I put together, there's at least one thing, because in the Tendermint space or in the Cosmos space, there's one of the main players in the ZK space, Succinct Labs. They have this SP1 prover platform. They have developed basically a prover for the Tendermint consensus, which generates nice ZK succinct proofs. It's not so much about the privacy feature, it's really about the succinctness in that case. But one of the future steps is at least do a feasibility if we can take those proofs from Cosmos and verify them in Cardano smart contracts. That's just one thing of the equation. The other thing, and I think it's more far out, is that we get those kinds of proofs from Cardano, because it would require us to implement basically the ledger rules as ZK circuits. And I think there are some people looking into it at IOHK. Thomas Fellekorp is his name.
Thomas, yeah.
I don't know if he really follows this at full speed, because I know he's also looking into doing proof verification on Cardano with the new BLS features that we recently got. But it would be cool, yeah. I definitely want a zero-knowledge Plutus VM. And our new CTO, Giorgio, he's also a fan of all this ZK stuff, because he's coming from the outside world where he was observing a lot of what's happening in the Ethereum space. And of course, ZK is great in the Ethereum space. I'm also, but just on a podcast level, following the Zero Knowledge podcast. So I'm very well aware of the different projects there, but just Cardano Foundation has no zero knowledge experts in there. And there are some people in our engineering team, like Casey, who's part of the Aiken team. They are also, they build up some knowledge, but there wasn't just a huge push. I also hope it's coming in the future, but again, it's kind of figuring out, okay, what are the next things we want to focus on?
So the reason why I'm asking is that apparently, potentially, Bitcoin could have will get potentially the ZK snarks verifier on using their smart contracts script, whatever. So potentially it's a possibility to build a trustless decentralized bridge using ZK snarks both ways. If we can check the Bitcoin rules, if Bitcoin could check ZK snarks from Cardano, we have a bridge. That would be awesome. Maybe that's something to do, because it would require some effort, obviously. Maybe that's something for Cardano Foundation, or, I don't know, Intersect or whatever.
Yeah, I fully agree.
No. Not a question.
I can make no comments, no commitments. Cool, then. Thank you very much. Thanks for listening. And just talk to me if you have more questions. Thanks.